Sometimes holding on to people can feel like a fight you're meant to win, but God's wisdom is often found in knowing when to release rather than to cling. If you're facing a relationship that's weighing you down, here are 3 signs that it might be time to let go. In every relationship, there are moments of tension, disagreements, and struggles. It's part of the natural ebb and flow of human interaction. But when the struggle becomes constant, it's no longer a temporary challenge, but a sign of something deeper. In the context of a relationship, whether romantic, familial, or platonic, God's plan is not for you to remain in a perpetual state of battle without seeing any growth. Struggle should be a catalyst for growth, not a never-ending cycle that drains your energy, spirit, and emotional well-being. When God calls us into relationships, it's not for us to remain stuck in a place of constant conflict. The purpose of connection with others is to grow together, build each other up, and ultimately reflect the love and grace that He has shown us. However, when a relationship feels like an ongoing fight, where there is no resolution, no progress, and no meaningful growth, it's often a sign that God is telling you it's time to step back and reevaluate the situation. Struggling in a relationship is inevitable. No relationship is without its challenges. There will be moments of miscommunication, differences of opinion, and times when things just don't seem to be going your way. However, healthy relationships allow for these struggles to be worked through, with the goal of building something stronger, deeper, and more enduring. Growth, whether emotional, spiritual, or personal, is the natural outcome of overcoming obstacles together. When both parties are committed to understanding, healing, and evolving, even the toughest challenges can serve as stepping stones to a stronger bond. But what happens when the struggle becomes the norm? When every conversation feels like walking through a minefield, and no matter how much effort you put into making things work, the tension never seems to dissipate? When this constant struggle exists without any significant progress, it can begin to feel like you're stuck in a rut. Every attempt to resolve issues or reach a mutual understanding falls short. The relationship seems to move in circles, repeating the same conflicts and unresolved issues over and over. This is when the question arises, is God telling me that it's time to let go? It's important to recognize that constant struggle without growth is not a healthy sign in any relationship. Relationships should be a place where growth is nurtured. Growth is often uncomfortable. It can be challenging, and it requires vulnerability. But it's a necessary part of building a deep, meaningful connection with others. When you're constantly fighting with no tangible result, it begins to erode the foundation of the relationship. The emotional investment you put in feels like a drain, with little to no return. Sometimes God allows us to experience these kinds of struggles because they reveal important truths. They show us the limitations of the relationship and highlight areas where change is necessary. But if after numerous attempts to reconcile, the struggle remains unyielding, it may be God's way of telling you that it's time to let go. It doesn't mean that the relationship wasn't valuable or that the person is inherently bad, but rather that, for whatever reason, the two of you are not meant to grow together. God's plans for us often require seasons of release in order to make space for new opportunities, growth, and peace. In these moments, it's crucial to listen to what God is saying. The struggle that remains without resolution can be an indication that the relationship is out of alignment with His will for you. If you feel continually drained, defeated, or disconnected, it may be time to step away from the toxic pattern. God desires peace, love, and growth in all of our relationships, and He will guide us when we're willing to listen. At times, letting go is the hardest decision to make, especially when you've invested a great deal of time and energy into the... In some cases, this one-sided dynamic may cause the individual who is giving more to question their own worth or feel as though they are invisible or unimportant. Furthermore, the lack of mutual effort often leads to an absence of emotional intimacy. Intimacy is built on consistent communication, trust, and vulnerability, all of which require effort from both individuals. Without this effort, the relationship may feel distant, superficial, or unfulfilling. You may find yourself longing for deeper connection, but it seems like the other person is not willing to meet you halfway. This emotional disconnect is not something that can be easily overcome without both parties committing to the effort of rebuilding trust. communication, and vulnerability. God calls us to surround ourselves with people who are equally invested in our well-being and who are willing to pour into us as much as we pour into them. Relationships where effort is not reciprocated can prevent us from walking in the fullness of what God has for us. When you continually give without receiving, it can start to feel like you're sacrificing your own emotional health and spiritual growth for someone who isn't willing to invest in the same way. This can hinder your ability to grow in other areas of your life and prevent you from stepping into the relationships God has prepared for you. Relationships where mutual effort and commitment are the foundation. A lack of mutual effort also signals a lack of respect and consideration for the other person's needs and feelings. If someone isn't putting in the effort to nurture the relationship, it often means they don't fully appreciate or value the other person. Relationships require time, energy, and emotional investment from both parties. And without that effort, the bond begins to erode. This lack of effort can stem from a variety of reasons, whether intentional or unintentional, but regardless of the cause, the result is the same. The relationship becomes unbalanced, and one person is left feeling depleted. God's design for relationships is one where both people work together to support each other, grow together, and contribute to each other's lives. When one person consistently puts in more effort than the other, it creates an environment where growth is stunted, trust is eroded, and emotional connection weakens. In these situations, it's important to evaluate the relationship and ask whether it's truly serving the purposes God has for your life, or whether it's keeping you stuck in a cycle of imbalance. Emotional drainage is one of the most significant signs that a relationship may be out of alignment with God's plan for your life. Relationships, whether they're romantic, familial, or platonic, are meant to bring joy, support, and growth. However, when a relationship consistently leaves you feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, or emotionally depleted, it's often a sign that something is not right. Emotional energy is just as important as physical energy. It fuels our well-being, influences our mental health, and shapes our ability to thrive in all areas of life. When we experience emotional drainage, it can negatively affect our mood, product. God desires us to live in peace, joy, and fulfillment. And emotional drainage in relationships can be a powerful indication that it's time to reevaluate the dynamics at play. One of the clearest signs of emotional drainage is the overwhelming feeling of exhaustion after spending time with someone. This exhaustion isn't the physical kind that comes from a long day's work. Rather, it's a deeper internal fatigue that seeps into your soul. It's the kind of tiredness that makes you feel empty, as though your emotional reserves have been completely depleted. When you're around a certain person, you may feel like you've given everything you have only to receive very little in return. This creates an imbalance where one person is doing all the emotional labor, while the other takes without offering any meaningful support or understanding. Over time, this emotional depletion can begin to affect every area of your life, but you may start to feel disconnected from your other relationships as the constant emotional drain leaves you with little energy to invest in other people or aspects of your life. It can also start to affect your work, your passions, and your sense of purpose. When you're emotionally drained, you may feel like you're merely surviving rather than thriving. The joy and vitality that once characterized your life are replaced by feelings of heaviness and fatigue. Emotional drainage often occurs when one person in the relationship is continuously leaning on the other for emotional support, without reciprocating in a healthy way. This dynamic can take many forms. For example, it could be someone who always needs to talk about their problems but never takes the time to listen to yours. It could also be someone who constantly demands your time, attention, or emotional energy, but is unwilling to invest in the relationship themselves. Regardless of the form it takes, the result is the same. One person is carrying the emotional weight of the relationship, and this unbalanced dynamic can quickly lead to burnout. God's design for relationships is rooted in mutual support, where both people uplift, encourage, and strengthen one another. A healthy relationship should offer emotional give and take, where both parties feel supported and valued. But when one person is always taking and never giving, the emotional toll can become overwhelming. This lack of balance creates an environment where one person's emotional well-being is sacrificed for the other, and this imbalance can lead to feelings of resentment, frustration, and loneliness. Another aspect of emotional drainage is the sense of emotional manipulation that can sometimes creep into relationships. Emotional manipulation occurs when one person uses guilt, fear, or other tactics to control the emotions and actions of the other person. This often happens subtly, where the individual feels obligated to give more emotionally than they're comfortable with, or are manipulated into believing that their worth is tied to constantly meeting the emotional needs of the other person. This kind of emotional dynamic can leave you feeling trapped, unsure of where you stand, and ultimately drained because your emotional boundaries are being violated. Additionally, emotional drainage can be caused by unresolved conflicts within the relationship. When issues are left unaddressed and communication breaks down, it creates a constant undercurrent of tension. This unresolved conflict can weigh heavily on the emotional state of both individuals involved. The stress of constantly trying to navigate difficult conversations, avoid confrontation, or suppress your own feelings to keep the peace can eventually wear you down. Over time, this unresolved emotional tension can begin to feel like a burden that you're carrying around, leading to a sense of emotional fatigue. God does not want us to live in a state of emotional depletion. He calls us to relationships where both people can experience the fullness of His peace, joy, and love. If you find that a particular relationship consistently leaves you feeling emotionally drained, it is important to examine why this is happening. Are you being emotionally manipulated or forced to carry the burden of unresolved issues? If the answer is yes, it's important to take a step back and evaluate whether this relationship is helping you grow or is instead preventing you from living the abundant life God has called you to. In these situations, seeking God's guidance through prayer and reflection is crucial. God desires us to live in relationships where we are supported, loved, and strengthened, not ones that leave us feeling empty and exhausted. If emotional drainage becomes a constant pattern, it may be a sign that God is inviting you to release the relationship or to set stronger boundaries in order to protect your emotional and spiritual health. One of the most damaging dynamics in any relationship is the constant disrespect or dismissal of boundaries. Boundaries are not just lines in the sand that separate us from others. They are the emotional, physical, and psychological limits we set in order to protect our well-being, maintain our sense of self, and create healthy, balanced relationships. When these boundaries are consistently ignored or dismissed, it can have serious emotional, mental, and even spiritual consequences. God created us with the ability to establish and maintain boundaries, not just for self-preservation, but also to honor the value He has placed on our lives. A relationship where boundaries are repeatedly disrespected is one that is out of alignment with God's plan for our emotional and spiritual health. Boundaries exist in all forms. They can be physical boundaries, like needing personal space or setting limits on physical touch. Or two, they can be emotional boundaries, such as requiring respect for our feelings and needs. They can also be psychological boundaries, like protecting ourselves from constant negativity or emotional manipulation. Regardless of the type, boundaries are crucial to maintaining a sense of safety, respect, and dignity in any relationship. When someone repeatedly violates these boundaries, it signals a lack of respect for your individuality and personal needs. Disrespecting or dismissing boundaries in a relationship often starts subtly. In the beginning, a person may disregard small requests or gently push the limits of what's comfortable for you. This might look like someone demanding your time when you've clearly expressed the need for rest, or disregarding your preferences in conversations or activities. These small actions can seem insignificant at first, but when left unchecked, they begin to form a pattern. Over time, what seemed like minor infractions can escalate into major violations that leave you feeling disrespected, hurt, and misunderstood. The deeper problem occurs when the violation of boundaries becomes a consistent behavior. Whether it's through emotional manipulation, guilt tripping, or simply ignoring your requests, this constant dismissal of boundaries communicates to you that your needs don't matter. In a healthy relationship, boundaries are meant to be respected and upheld by both parties. When that doesn't happen, the person who's being disrespected begins to feel invalidated, devalued, and even powerless in the relationship. It's as if your needs, desires, and limits are irrelevant to the other person. This ongoing disregard can erode trust, self-esteem, and emotional safety, making it difficult for the relationship to thrive. The most troubling aspect of boundary violations is the toll they take on your emotional and mental health. Constantly being in a situation where your boundaries are disregarded can leave you feeling like you're walking on eggshells, unsure of when the next violation will occur. It can create feelings of anxiety, frustration, and even depression. This emotional strain can also lead to physical symptoms such as fatigue, insomnia, or a lack of appetite. When we are emotionally drained by the continuous disrespect of our boundaries, it can be nearly impossible to find peace or healing in the relationship. God calls us to love one another, but he also calls us to protect our hearts and minds. In the Bible, we are reminded that we should guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs 4:23. Boundaries are an essential part of this protection. They help us keep the negative influences of others from seeping into our emotional and spiritual well-being. When someone disrespects your boundaries, they are not only disregarding your personal needs, but are also stepping into areas of your life that God has designed to remain sacred and protected. By continuing to tolerate these violations, you may inadvertently open yourself up to emotional harm, which God never intends for you to experience. When boundaries are consistently dismissed, the person on the receiving end may begin to feel a deep sense of shame or guilt for wanting to protect themselves. This emotional manipulation, whether subtle or overt, can convince them that they are being too sensitive or selfish. This can lead to a breakdown in communication as they may begin to suppress their feelings and needs in order to keep the peace. However, suppressing these emotions only leads to further resentment and emotional disconnect. In relationships where boundaries are regularly violated, the lack of respect for one's needs often leads to a toxic, unbalanced dynamic. This can create a sense of helplessness, as the person whose boundaries are being ignored may feel that they can't stand up for themselves without facing backlash or rejection. Unfortunately, when one person's boundaries are continually violated, they may start to lose trust in the relationship. They may even begin to doubt their own worth and the value of their emotional needs. This can lead to a diminished sense of self-respect, making it even harder to establish healthy boundaries in future relationships. God's desire for our relationships is that they be marked by love, respect, and mutual care. In any relationship, boundaries are a reflection of self-love and respect. By setting healthy boundaries, we honor the value that God has placed on us as individuals. When someone repeatedly disregards these boundaries, it's a sign that they do not respect you or the value that God has placed on your life. In such cases, it may be necessary to step back and assess whether the relationship is healthy, or if it's time to create distance in order to protect your well-being and honor the boundaries that God has entrusted to you. Doubt and confusion are two powerful emotions that can cause a person to feel unsettled, lost, and uncertain about the path they are on. When these feelings arise in a relationship, it is often a sign that something is amiss, and that God may be urging you to take a step back and reevaluate the situation. In healthy relationships, clarity and mutual understanding should be present, allowing both individuals to feel secure in their connection and confident in their shared journey. However, when doubt and confusion consistently arise, it can signal deeper issues that need to be addressed. God's desire for us is to live in peace and confidence, not in a state of emotional turmoil and uncertainty. If a relationship is causing you to feel increasingly doubtful or confused, it may be time to listen to the signs and reflect on the true nature of the connection. Doubt in a relationship often arises when there is a lack of clarity or transparency. This can happen when one person is withholding information, being dishonest, or acting in ways that are inconsistent with their words. When you cannot trust the actions of the other person to align with their words or promises, it creates a space for doubt to grow. Over time, this doubt can chip away at the foundation of the relationship, causing you to question the other person's intentions, loyalty, and sincerity. What was once a secure and confident bond can quickly turn into a relationship fraught with suspicion and insecurity. Confusion often accompanies this doubt. When someone is not clear about their intentions, or when there is inconsistency in their behavior, it creates a fog of uncertainty. You may find yourself questioning whether you are interpreting things correctly, wondering whether the issues in the relationship are your fault, or struggling to understand what the other person really wants. This confusion can be mentally and emotionally exhausting, as it keeps you in a constant state of wondering what is really going on. Instead of feeling at peace, you may feel anxious, overwhelmed, and lost, unsure of where you stand or what the future holds. In relationships where doubt and confusion are prevalent, it can become difficult to make decisions with confidence. You may find yourself overthinking every word, every action, and every interaction. When there is no clear direction, it can feel like you are walking in circles, unsure of which way to go. This lack of clarity can cause paralysis, making it difficult to take any meaningful action. You might feel stuck, unable to move forward, but also hesitant to move backward, unsure of what is right. This is where God's guidance is so essential. God desires for us to walk in the light of His truth, not in the shadows of uncertainty and confusion. The Bible reminds us in James 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. God calls us to seek clarity and understanding, not to be mired in confusion. If you find yourself in a relationship where doubt and confusion are clouding your judgment, it is essential to seek God's wisdom through prayer and reflection. He will provide the clarity you need to navigate the situation. One of the most concerning aspects of doubt and confusion in a relationship is the emotional toll it can take. Prolonged uncertainty can lead to feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, and even anxiety or depression. When you are constantly questioning the authenticity of the relationship, it can erode your sense of self-worth. You may begin to question your value, wondering if the other person truly cares for you or if you are just another option in their life. This insecurity can diminish your confidence and make it harder to trust not only the other person, but also yourself and your own judgment. In some cases, the doubt and confusion are a result of emotional manipulation or gaslighting, where the other person deliberately distorts the truth or invalidates your feelings in order to keep you in a state of uncertainty. Gaslighting can cause you to doubt your perception of reality, making you second-guess your thoughts and emotions. If you are constantly being told that you are overreacting or being too sensitive, it can leave you feeling powerless and unsure of what is true. This type of manipulation is not only damaging to your emotional well-being, but it also hinders your ability to make clear decisions. God created us to live in His peace, and confusion is the antithesis of peace. When confusion becomes a consistent theme in a relationship, it may be a sign that the relationship is not aligned with God's purpose for your life. His will for us is not to live in a constant state of questioning, but to experience clarity, confidence, and peace as we navigate life's relationships. If you are finding that doubt and confusion are becoming a regular part of your relationship, it may be time to reassess whether that relationship is truly fulfilling God's purposes in your life, or if it is causing more harm than good. When doubt and confusion are allowed to persist, they can lead to emotional and spiritual distress. You may begin to feel disconnected from God's peace and guidance, as the constant uncertainty prevents you from hearing His voice clearly. In these moments, it is vital to take a step back, reflect on the relationship, and ask God for the wisdom and discernment to understand whether it is truly serving you and His plans for your life. Peace is a precious gift from God, one that transcends understanding and offers rest to the soul. It's the stillness that allows us to live confidently, trusting in God's will and His plan for our lives. The Bible reminds us that God's peace is something that guards our hearts and minds, a peace that no circumstance or trial can easily disrupt. Yet there are moments in life when this peace is disturbed, when everything seems to be in chaos and our sense of tranquility is shaken. It's in these times of disruption that God may be working in ways we cannot fully understand, guiding us to a place of growth, deeper faith, and trust in His sovereignty. A divine disruption in your peace is not merely a random event or a coincidence. It is often a sign that God is calling you to step into something new, to let go of old patterns, or to move forward in a direction that aligns more fully with His purposes for your life. Divine disruption happens when the normal flow of life is interrupted and your peace is disturbed for a reason beyond your understanding. You may experience it in the form of an unexpected event, a change in your circumstances, or a shift in your relationships. It could be a career change, the loss of a loved one, a move to a new place, or even a spiritual crisis that leaves you feeling lost or uncertain. These disruptions are often unsettling and uncomfortable. At the surface, they seem to take away the stability and peace you once knew. But underneath the chaos, God is at work. He often uses these disruptions as instruments to reshape your character, draw you closer to Him, and help you align more fully with His divine plan. One of the first responses to a divine disruption in your peace is often confusion. When things are going well, and you feel secure in your life and your faith, an unexpected change can throw you off course. This disruption may feel jarring, and it might shake your confidence, causing you to wonder why this is happening or what you are supposed to learn from it. You might ask yourself, why me? Why now? It is normal to experience confusion during these moments, but it's important to remember that God's ways are not always our ways. What we perceive as a disturbance to our peace may in reality be an invitation to trust God more deeply and to surrender areas of our lives that we have been holding on to tightly. Divine disruptions can serve as wake-up calls. They interrupt the patterns of complacency that we sometimes fall into. If we are too comfortable, too settled in our routines, or too focused on our own plans, God may allow a disruption to jolt us out of our comfort zone. These disruptions, though difficult in the moment, are often what lead us to deeper growth and transformation. They remind us that we are not in control, that we cannot predict the future, and that our peace does not come from our circumstances, but from God alone. The peace of God is not the absence of challenges, but the presence of His grace and sovereignty in the midst of them. Another aspect of divine disruption is the call to let go. God may use disruptions in our lives to show us that we have become too attached to something that is hindering our spiritual growth. This could be a relationship, a job, a dream, or even a lifestyle that has become an idol in our lives. When we cling to things that are not aligned with God's will for us, it can create a false sense of peace, one that is fragile and dependent on circumstances. A divine disruption may come in the form of a loss or a shift that forces us to reevaluate where our true peace comes from. It's an opportunity to release what we've been holding on to and trust that God has something better in store for us. In the midst of a divine disruption, we are often faced with a choice to lean into our confusion and fear or to trust God's leading. The disruption in your peace may seem overwhelming, but it's important to remember that God is still with you and His peace still remains available. Philippians 4:7 tells us that God's peace, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Even when our external circumstances are unsettled, God offers us a peace that is rooted in His presence and His eternal promises. The divine disruption may cause a temporary disturbance, but it can also be a powerful reminder of the peace that only God can provide. A divine disruption in your peace is also a call to re-examine your priorities and your focus. Sometimes we get caught up in the busyness of life and forget to center ourselves on the things that truly matter. We may focus on our career, our possessions, or our achievements, seeking peace in external accomplishments rather than in God. When God disrupts our peace, He invites us to shift our focus from temporary things to eternal truths. He may be calling us to invest more in our relationships, to serve others, or to deepen our walk with Him. This disruption is an opportunity for introspection, for asking ourselves whether we are truly living in alignment with the purpose God has set before us. Ultimately, divine disruptions are not meant to harm us, but to grow us. They may cause temporary discomfort, but they lead to lasting transformation. They can refine our faith, strengthen our trust in God, and deepen our dependence on His strength. When our peace is disrupted, we are given the opportunity to rely not on ourselves, but on God's grace and power to sustain us. In times of disruption, we must remember that God is still in control. His plan for us is still intact, and His peace can still rule in our hearts. So, in conclusion, divine disruptions in our peace are not accidents, but purposeful moments designed by God to draw us closer to Him and realign us with His divine plan. Though unsettling and uncomfortable, these disruptions serve as opportunities for growth, transformation, and a deeper reliance on God's wisdom and strength. They remind us that true peace is not dependent on our circumstances, but on God's presence in our lives. By embracing these disruptions, we can emerge stronger, more focused, and more aligned with God's will, trusting that He is always working for our good, even in the midst of chaos.